guys, welcome back to the channel and another lightning round video, which I know some of you love and some of you not so much. So I've been getting a lot of comments that were saying that like all my videos are lightning round videos now, and that's not true. I'm actually not doing any more lightning round videos than I used to. I do one lightning round video a month, but I have cut down on other videos. There's a lot of stuff going on outside of YouTube that I will eventually be announcing. It's going to be really exciting. I can't wait to share it with you guys. But until then, I have kind of scaled back a little bit. There will be another video coming out next week. But for today, I have some very intriguing questions to answer, including let's talk about China's new thorium reactor, which I know a lot of you guys are interested in. So let's do this. First question goes to JD Creeper. It's kind of a following up on a previous question. He says, why send humans to Mars or Venus? Unless terraformed, anyone sent will be miserable and go insane. Using Antarctica as an example, colonies will devolve into anarchy. Skylab, in parentheses, all for what? What does this accomplish? So the question or the debate around sending humans versus just sending robots is actually an interesting one, and we can talk about that. I do want to push back on a couple of the assumptions that you make here, though. Like, assuming that anybody that goes to Antarctica would go insane is a bit of a stretch, if you ask me. Like, there are people who live in Antarctica for 4 or 5 months of darkness all the time. There have been hundreds of people that have lived down there, and I'm sure a few of them have had difficult challenges living in that. But I definitely wouldn't say it's like a guaranteed stroll into crazy town or anything. And you use Skylab as an example of how a colony would devolve into anarchy, and yeah, I'm sorry. Again, that's a stretch. What JD's referring to is the mutiny that occurred on Skylab 4 with Gerald P. Jerry Carr, William G. Gibson, and William R. Pogue. They were on an 84-day mission, which was by far the longest any Americans had been in space at that point. And they, at some point, became overworked and basically kind of staged a strike for the day. Like, basically turned off their radio and gave themselves some downtime. So yeah, the Skylab 4 mutiny has become a bit of a space myth. What really happened was that, you know, on Skylab they went up there and they literally planned out every minute of their day. They just like constantly had something to do. And something that I learned when looking into this was that at the time they didn't have like a global network of communication. So they only had like 10 minutes of communication time for every 90-minute orbit that they had. And at the beginning of every workday on Skylab, you know, ground control would send up just pages and pages of like stuff that they had to do that day. And they were starting to get a bit worn out. So what the crew actually started doing was, instead of all three of them showing up on these calls with ground control, they started switching out just one person at a time so that the others could, you know, go do their daily stuff. And apparently one time there was a miscommunication and nobody showed up for the call. So this idea that they were striking went throughout ground control. So there was tension going on between them and ground control. There's no questioning that. But it basically came down to they were able to get ground control to give them a day off. It wasn't even like, you know, without permission. They did it with permission. It's just there was some tension there. But that was a learning thing. They talked it out and they used that as a learning process to go forward. Yeah, in this interview with the BBC, Jerry Carr said that it was the first sensitivity session in space. So yeah, in no way did it descend into some kind of Lord of the Flies style anarchy, and in no way does that mean that humans can't handle long-term spaceflight. I mean, the length of their mission was tiny compared to the length of the ISS missions they do today. I mean, the ISS has been in constant operation for well over 20 years with no major incident. Like, Suni and Butch have been on the ISS for 3 times longer than the Skylab 4 people were, and they were only supposed to be there for a few weeks. And they're okay. But no, that general question as to like why send humans as opposed to just sending robots is a good question, and there's arguments for and against it. You know, some would argue that we need to make life multiplanetary, that this planet is only going to be around for so long, the resources here are only going to last so long, and if we're going to survive into the deep, deep, deep future, we're going to have to eventually get off this planet. Some would say that, you know, there's a human element, that there's only, you know, so much you can learn with robots, and that we just have to send humans to really get a full picture of, you know, what's going on in these other places. On the other hand, robotics have come a long way. They have sensors and abilities and instruments that give them the ability to do things that humans can't do. They cost a lot less than humans. They don't need to eat or poop. But ultimately, you know, I think there is something to be said about the spirit of exploration that humans have. We have always been explorers. We've always wanted to go to the places we've never been before. And you know, once you've gone everywhere there is to go on Earth, gotta go somewhere else. Like, I was in Hawaii this last year, and one of the things that just super impressed me was like the way the Polynesians spread from island to island over, 1,000 years or so. I mean, they would get in these tiny boats and just sail across the Pacific Ocean, having no idea what was out there until they just found some tiny island. I think that is so indicative of our human need to explore, that just drive that we have. That yeah, I think that's something that's never going to go away. I'll be positive and just leave it with that. All right, next question. Philip Shane asked, have there ever been any tycoons who were genuinely nice guys or gals, or is megalomania essential for the role? Okay, I talked previously on a previous video about a guy named Charles Feeney who started the Giving Pledge. He's a billionaire and he's pledging to give away all of his money by the time he dies, and he's gotten all these other billionaires to sign on. He's kind of the stated good billionaire out there. Now, whether a particular billionaire is a good guy or a bad guy, I feel like I can't say without actually knowing the person. That just feels very judgmental. A lot of these guys, the tycoons from history, they had good PR, and so they're remembered from history as being somewhat good guys, even if they were like ruthless. I don't know. I think of Carnegie as a good example of that. He was definitely like a robber baron, but then he did set up a lot of foundations and charitable organizations that support the arts and stuff like that. Now, I know it's a popular sentiment right now, for very good reason, that there are no good billionaires, that the only way you can become a billionaire is by basically hoarding value away from the rest of the world, basically making everybody else poorer. And I totally get that. I think maybe the counter argument that some people might give is that the billionaires are basically taking this value and then deciding themselves how to distribute it charitably to other people. You only live in this world for so long, so they're kind of taking that money while they have it and then passing it on when they die. Of course, that means that they are picking and choosing where this money goes, and having one individual person make that decision is questionable. And I think whether that's good or bad kind of depends on where you stand on the capitalism, socialism scale. I'm not personally one of these people that thinks that there should be no billionaires. There's a lot of people that do believe that. I don't necessarily believe that. I do think they should be taxed more. But I don't know that I 100% agree that you have to be like a bad person to get that rich. I think you can just make good, smart money decisions and business decisions to get there. It doesn't necessarily make you an awful person. I think it just is like a particular set of skills, as the saying goes, that people have that, if you combine that with a bit of a hoarding mentality, it can lead to having that much money. That kind of makes me think of, I did a conversation podcast with a cult expert named Yanya Lalick, and she was kind of talking about the playbook that cult leaders kind of go by. And they all kind of follow a similar pattern or a similar playbook. And I was basically asking her, like, is this something that's done consciously? Like, do they know if I do X, Y, Z, I'll create a cult around myself? Or is it just they have the right combination of personality traits that sort of naturally become that? It's fascinating to me how they tend to follow the same playbook. I mean, Am I right in saying that, or is that?
Oh yes, and in my book, Take Back Your Life, in the chapter about the leaders, we talk about it looks like they all go to the cookie cutter Messiah school, right?
So that's my question though. Like, where do they learn this, or is it just something they all stumble into accidentally, and it's just a function of their malignant narcissism?
Yeah,
and it just kind of flows from that.
Yeah, I think I think they happen to be skilled at persuasion. They may be charming people or come across to some people as charming. I mean, it's important, this whole idea of charisma, it's important to remember that charisma is in the eye of the beholder, right? Somebody you might think is charismatic, I might think is a total creep, right? So it's that personal relationship. Once you attribute charisma to somebody, they have power over you.
So, I think that might be true for billionaires as well. They just have a particular set of personality traits that kind of make money and get them to that place. I mean, some of these guys are morons. I'll just say it. Some billionaires, some super wealthy people are absolute morons. I have gotten to know some fairly wealthy people in the last several years, and I can say they have all the same insecurities that the rest of us do. They seem to be a bit more prone to conspiracy theories than I would say the average person is. But they have a skill for making money. They know how to play that shell game of moving money over here and then moving it over there, and it makes more money. And I think if you have that skill, whether it's learned or innate, and a bit of a hoarding instinct, then yeah, you might become a billionaire yourself. Also fair to say most of these guys and gals came from money in the first place, which is helpful. And all of that has nothing to do with whether somebody is good or bad. It's just they just have that skill, that personality trait. So I would say that billionaires, there's probably some good billionaires out there, just like there are good people in the rest of society. There's also a lot of assholes, just like the rest of society. I will say, though, we never really hear about the good ones. We always just hear about the bad ones and how they are making the rest of our lives miserable. Psychologically, there's also the fact that, if you were to talk to any of these guys, they would all say that they're doing good things in the world, that they're contributing a lot to charities and whatnot, and that they're, creating value in businesses that hire people and all that. Human beings have this justification ability to just talk ourselves and convince ourselves into anything. And nobody wants to think that they're a bad guy. So I would say that if you ask any of them, they would say that their heart's in the right place. They're going at it from, with good intentions and whatnot. But everybody that does bad things say they're doing it for good intentions. That's just how we are. In fact, there's that whole thing of like selling out your own principles to like get to that next step, that line in the sand, then you just go 1 inch further, and then there's another line, and then you go 1 inch further. Like we do that mentally all the time. In fact, some of them may justify them being good people because they went against their own principles, which was painful to do this thing, that they did the hard thing. But anyway, that's just my take on it. In the meantime, I'm going to go buy a new boat. All right, next question comes from Donna Sawyer. Rat King phenomenon. Can you discuss this horrifying situation? Is there a Possum King phenomenon or a Raccoon King phenomenon? I'm going to have to go over here. Donna, I just want you to know I could have gone my whole life without knowing this and been just fine. I was just fine not knowing this. So, Rat Kings, it turns out, are when a group of rats get their tails knotted together and then all die. This is an actual thing. So I found this post on Medium, and this picture right here is apparently the largest specimen of a rat king that has been found. There were 32 rats that got their tails all tangled up together and just died because they couldn't eat. Yummy. So there is some controversy around this, hence the question that Donna asked, like, is this a real thing? Because, like, a lot of these were found, I think there's like a few dozen that have been found, but there were a lot of them were found back in like the early 1800s when like cryptids were a big thing. Like a lot of people were finding like, foraging cryptids like the mermaid that you've seen in pictures and stuff like that. So yeah, according to this, there are 58 reliable rat kings that have been found, of which 6 are preserved for the public to see. And something that I noticed, I was looking through this a little bit, and they all seem to take place in northern latitudes. I think there were some that were found like in the deeper south. But anyway, areas where things get cold. So the theory is it's all of these rats huddled together for warmth, and their tails start to get stuck together because of excrement and body secretions and stuff like that, and it gets frozen together. Or tree sap. I think tree sap can also get stuck in there. So their tails get kind of stuck together and knotted up, and then as they struggle to get out, that knot just tightens and tightens until they're unable to free themselves from it. This mostly happens with black rats, and apparently black rats have like sort of semi-prehensile tails, so they do have the ability to kind of twist and turn and lock in together. So I think like there's still a little skepticism out there as to whether or not it's a real thing. Again, because of the whole cryptid thing from the 1800s, but no, that the general consensus is that it is a real thing that happens, and it's horrifying. In fact, this article has a video right here of a squirrel king. You asked about raccoon kings and possum kings. I didn't see anything about that, but there are squirrel kings, and this one was actually caught on video, and it's in Bangor, Maine, which again is a northern area where things get cold. So here's like 3 or 4 of them that are stuck together, and they're running around like this. Oh, that's so horrifying and sad. Actually, I imagine it happens worse with squirrels because their tails are so fuzzy. They could probably, collect and stick a lot more. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about it other than it seems to happen in northern latitudes. It's not something that happens very often, but yeah, rats and certain rodents can get their tails all matted together and not be able to survive. Although I am a little confused because I've heard stories of rats that have their tails like trapped in traps and stuff like that have chewed their tails off and escaped. Why they don't chew their tails off in this scenario, I don't know, other than maybe they just can't quite get back there. Like maybe they're, I don't know. But those are the theories. It is a real thing that seems to happen. And again, could have gone the rest of my life without knowing about it. Thank you. All right, next question from Brian Beswick. He asks, "Hey Joe, what are your thoughts on NASA's new administrator, Janet Petro, the first woman to head the agency?" Yeah, I mean, after decades of people throwing shade and being disappointed at male administrators, I think it's finally time for us to be disappointed by a female administrator. Actually, I didn't know about this until you asked the question, so let's look her up and see. All right, so this is Janet Petro on the NASA website, acting NASA administrator. I'll get to the acting part here in just a second. She's been at NASA for a while now. She was actually the 11th director of the John F. Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Looks like she joined NASA in 2017. It says through January 2020, she was the program executive leading the agency-wide initiative for phase implementation, restructure, all mission-enabling functions to ensure efficient. Good Lord, this is corporate speak, isn't it? Her assignment to the Mission Support Future Architecture program concluded in 2020. So she's been at NASA a while. Prior to joining NASA, she was at the Science Applications International Corp. in McDonnell Douglas Aerospace. So she's been doing this for a while. I do need to highlight the acting administrator thing. She's kind of just there temporarily. Bill Nelson has stepped down because he was Biden's nominee. Jared Isaacman is still the nominee that needs to go through Senate confirmation hearings. I don't know exactly when that is, but in the meantime, Janet is running the place, and so yeah, she's the first female administrator. So it does say here on space.com, it says that this appointment came as a surprise to many. Often the administration takes office, the incumbent NASA administrator stands down to make way. Ordinarily, it goes to the top civil servant in the agency. In this case, it would have been a guy named Jim Free, but she got promoted to the role instead of him. So, I mean, it is a temporary position. The only thing she's done so far was to close all the DEI programs that were going on at NASA, but that was, to be fair, an executive order that she had to follow. Although to be more fair, she did state in a memo that these programs divided Americans by race, wasted taxpayer dollars, and resulted in shameful discrimination, which makes her kind of sound like a believer. Can't help but wonder if people are calling her a DEI hire because she's a woman. But yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to say about it. She's just going to have the role temporarily. I think it is, a good thing to have a woman in the position, even if it is temporary. But I guess we'll see what happens when Jared Isaacman gets nominated, or he's already been nominated. When he gets confirmed by the Senate, chances are he'll take it over. So there are some people who have concerns about like Jared taking over because I keep saying Jared, it's Jared. Because he's closely involved with SpaceX and whatever. There's the whole like private sector coming in and taking over the public sector. But I will also make the argument that happens all the time. To be fair, there's nothing really new about that. Sometimes you need to bring in the most talented people for a position. Sometimes the most talented person might not be in the public sector. They might be in the private sector, and there's nothing new about that. That happens all the time. But it doesn't mean we do still need to pay close attention to that to make sure there's not conflicts of interest and stuff. But at the very least, it seems like Janet Petro has a solid background in science and engineering. She's got a past at NASA, so she's not unqualified for the job, which is a good thing. She's not just a complete toady, it seems like. But I guess we'll see what happens. All right, next up, Hallie Brixt Hagholm wrote, "Are you keeping your Tesla? If not, what car would you get?" All right, let's talk about this. All right, the quick answer to this question is that literally like last week, I put down a reservation for a Rivian R2, which doesn't come out until 2026, barring any delays, which is always possible. But yeah, most likely my next car is going to be a Rivian. So let's leave the politics out of it completely for right now. I'll get to that. But first of all, I'm not somebody that just goes out and buys the next big shiny new car. I usually keep my cars for a really long time. I've actually only had 5 cars my entire life, which, counting from 16 when I started driving, that comes out to about 1 car every 7 years. Some cars I've had longer than others, but that's the average. But no, I got my Model 3 in 2018, so it's kind of time. In fact, by the time I get the new car, I will probably have had this one longer than average. For the record, I love that car. I love my Model 3. It's easily the best car I've ever had. Even though there's all this anti-Tesla sentiment going on right now, I still love the car. But I mean, it's been an interesting ride having this car. When I first got it, it was so brand new. But everywhere I went, every time I parked in a parking spot, somebody would come up and ask me questions about it. It was like this novelty thing. I remember like how many times, and it happened all the time, people kept saying like, so it doesn't take any gas at all? Like they just couldn't wrap their heads around it. It was such a new thing. But at the time, there was actually still a pretty strong anti-EV sentiment out there. It was considered a very lefty liberal thing, I got shouted insults from guys in pickups. I did get coal rolled a few times, and I was constantly checking my Sentry cam, my security cameras in the car, because there were all these clips going around of people getting their cars keyed and damaged and stuff. So that was the world that I got that car in. And I wasn't trying to make a statement out of it. I've just always wanted an EV, and this was the first car that had the range that I needed living in Texas, and especially at the time because the charging infrastructure wasn't a fraction of what it is now. But it was the first one that had the range that I needed and was in a price range that was only, somewhat ridiculous instead of impossible. Flash forward to today, those very same people that were shouting insults at me in 2018 are now Elon's biggest fans, and it's the lefties that are going around keying Teslas and giving me dirty looks everywhere I go. We are living in the upside down, people. So yeah, there's kind of a part of me that just wants to have a car again and not be driving around in a political flashpoint everywhere I go. Plus, I am somebody who has talked about EVs here on YouTube for over 10 years now, and I've only driven one EV, so it would be nice to have a different brand so I could, compare and contrast and report that back to you guys. Content, baby! So all of that is true. But yeah, there is a political component to this. I would be lying if I said there wasn't. No, I don't agree with the direction that Elon has taken lately. No, I don't align with his behavior, and I don't want people to think I do. Like, Trump tweeted recently that people are illegally boycotting Tesla right now, which, I'm sorry, that's just an absurd statement. Granted, in France, they're burning down Tesla dealerships, which is probably illegal. I'm not that familiar with France's laws, but that's probably illegal. But yeah, when I bought this car, it was because it was a car that fit my needs, but it was also because I aligned with the company's mission, accelerating the transition to sustainable energy. That was their motto. I was all about that. And now it's associated with a movement that I don't align with. So yeah, I'm moving on. Eventually. I still like the car. And that's not a boycott, okay? That's just the free market. That's how the free market works. I love how these guys are always so pro-free market until it works against them, and then it's sue baby sue. So I know a lot of you probably don't like what I just said, but there's also some people on the left that are probably going to excoriate me in the comments for not getting rid of it sooner, for waiting a whole year or however long it's going to be. And to them, I would just say, I'm not paying anything to Tesla anymore. I paid off that car a long time ago. And I'm not really in a rush to have a car payment again. And I do still like the car. This is another thing that's kind of shifted a bit since I started getting this car. There have always been people who just kind of like hated on Elon and hated on Tesla and said that they were, disasters and they exploded and all that stuff. And I have defended it this whole time. I will continue to defend it because I have had this car for 7 years and I've loved every minute of it. It is a great car. And look, if you do align with the movement that it is now associated with, have at it. Go get one. They're great cars. But to end this on a positive note, I will say, it's really cool that the EV market has matured to the point that there are options out there. Like, when I first got this car, it really was kind of the only option I had, again, in the price range that I could afford and to give me the range that I needed. But now there's tons of options, and for what it's worth, I do think that Tesla and Elon deserve credit for that. Hate him all you want, I do think he deserves credit for that. But seriously, hate him all you want. Rage Zero Humor Singer asked, why are there no South Atlantic or Eastern South Pacific hurricanes? I've got a quick and easy answer for you. It's because they're called cyclones. No, actually, apparently, the tropical storms that occur north of the equator are called hurricanes, and the ones south of the equator are called cyclones, but that's a cop-out. And yes, they spin in different directions, north and south, just like toilets. The toilet thing is a myth, by the way. The cyclone thing is not. Cyclones are the world's toilets. Let's put it that way. So apparently there are South Atlantic tropical cyclones, but they are much more infrequent and they're a lot less powerful than the ones above the equator. So yeah, I mean, it says right here on Wikipedia that they are unusual weather events that occur in the southern hemisphere. It says down here, very strong vertical wind shear in the troposphere is considered a deterrent, and that the water temperatures in the tropics of the southern Atlantic are cooler than those in the tropical North Atlantic. As we all know, the warmer the water temperature is, the stronger the storms can be. But they do happen. They're just very infrequent. Like here's a map of all of the subtropical cyclones that have occurred since 2004. But yeah, no, it's apparently just mostly a water temperature difference, and there's probably stronger high-level winds that occur south of the equator that just kind of like disrupt all that. Now, in the southeastern Pacific, which is basically west of South America, you're right, there are no big tropical storms that occur there. And there's an interesting like map that I found here that I want to pull up that kind of illustrates it. So yeah, this is from a Reddit thread, and it basically has everything to do with the Andes Mountains. So the Andes Mountain Range is this like really high mountain range on the west side of South America. And what happens is the air comes this way from like Brazil and the Amazon and all that, and it's really wet, and it hits the Andes, it rises up, it condenses, and it falls as rain. So the east side of the Andes Mountains is a wet zone, whereas the other side over here on Chile is very dry. But what that also means is that this air that's passing over here, it condenses and falls, so there's a lot less moisture in that air as it flows into the Pacific. And so there's just not much stuff to make storms out of. Now, the interesting thing is down here, the weather patterns shift. The prevailing winds shift to the other direction. So it's actually the west side of the Andes that's wet and the east side that goes dry. And there's fewer cyclones way down south just because the water's much colder down there and it's just not going to do that there. So yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I'd never looked into this before. I'd never seen that map before, which I think is really interesting. So, but I think that's the answer. That's the best answer I can give. Pretty solid. Thanks for that question. That was interesting. All right, got one more question to get to, but first let me do a shout out and get Zoe to praise the people who have joined on Patreon and the members. Here we go. On Patreon, we got Spinda Appreciates the Arts, Aaron Williams, Curtis Lee Ziedelhack, Jonathan Schaefer, Keaton Gradagut, Ernest Zemtris, yeah, Xenia N, PSP Geezer, Nick Parker and Izzy, Travis Scagliarni, and Rian Coetzee. And for members, we've got Heloisa Schmidt-Berg, Bebax, Mudzink, Tallgrass Meander, Your Mom Gay, The Ram, Old Greg, Nicole Jacobson, Chase Hammond, Sarah S., Devin Heidecker, Abdullah, McFlyer Pie, Ellie S. Dreamer, Daylemma, and Splashbox. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you would like to join them and get early access to videos, get a little thing by your name down in the comments if you're a member, or if you sign up at the solar system level on Patreon, you get to ask one of the questions that I talk about in these videos. So it's patreon.com/answerswithjoe, or just hit the join button down below to become a member. All right, our final question goes to Natsar, who asked, do you have any news about thorium nuclear reactors and the progress to make public more open for nuclear energy? Yeah, cool. So yeah, I talked about thorium reactors a long time ago on the channel. Haven't really had an update in a long time, but it's an interesting topic. So thorium is, I don't know, it's kind of like nuclear fusion energy. It always seems to be 10 or 20 years away, but it has the added frustration that we totally have the technology to do it now. We're just not doing it. So if you're not up to speed on thorium energy, it's basically a type of breeder reactor. What is a breeder reactor? So most nuclear energy comes from fissile materials, usually uranium-235, and fissile material is something that can sustain a chain reaction. And it does this by absorbing a neutron. It takes in a neutron and then it splits and creates energy. The problem is that uranium-235 is only 0.7% of uranium ore when it's dug out of the earth. The other is uranium-238, which is not fissile. So processing uranium, it's very expensive, very energy intensive, and it creates a lot of nuclear waste. Now there's also something called fertile material, which is not fissile, but it can take on a neutron to be bred into fissile material. So for example, uranium-238, which makes up the vast majority of uranium ore, that can be bred into plutonium-239, which is fissile. But plutonium isn't usually used in like fast water reactors for various reasons. One of them being that the nuclear waste that it creates when it's done is radioactive for like ever. Also, plutonium is used in nuclear weapons, so breeding it is kind of dangerous and probably violates some international treaties. But there is another fertile material that can be used in this way, and that's thorium. Specifically thorium-232, which can take on a neutron to become protactinium-233, which then decays down into uranium-233. And uranium-233 is fissile. And something that's great about thorium is there's like way more of it than uranium out there. There's like 3 or 4 times more thorium in the world than uranium. And thorium-232 isn't some small fraction of thorium ore. It is 100% of the thorium that's out there is breedable and usable. So yeah, a thorium breeder reactor is something that takes thorium, exposes it to something that's radioactive, blasts it, turns it into uranium-233, and then it uses that as fuel to create energy. I'm leaving a lot out, of course, but that's the main thing about thorium that people get so excited about. It's very abundant, it's a lot more efficient, and it doesn't create as bad nuclear waste when it's done. In fact, it actually can use nuclear waste to do the breeding, so it actually gives a purpose to the waste that otherwise would just have to be stored underground somewhere forever. So yeah, that's what people get excited about when it comes to thorium. In fact, I read in one of these articles that there's enough thorium in the United States to power the United States for 1,000 years. Now, there are a lot of reasons why thorium has never quite taken off. One of them is just that these reactors are super expensive to build, and there's still a lot of development that needs to be done. So somebody has to front the money for that, and that's always hard to come by. And there have been a number of thorium reactors that have been built over the years, experimental and demonstration projects and whatnot. But one that's never been done before is a thorium molten salt reactor. And these are considered a lot more efficient and a lot more safe because instead of using water to cool down the rods, the uranium rods, it actually puts this in a liquid solution of molten salt, which can be kept at around 600 or 700 degrees Celsius. And there's what they call a freeze plug at the bottom of it. So there's no way that it can melt down. If things go wrong, it just kind of pours out the bottom and it just cools off. So this is something that's never been done, but literally in the last month or so your timing is good, China did announce that they're working on a thorium molten salt reactor. So some details from this IEEE Spectrum post that I'll link down in the description. You can read it yourself. So they're building it in the Gobi Desert, and it says here that this 10 megawatt reactor project managed by the Chinese Academy of Sciences Shanghai Institute of Applied Physics is scheduled to be operational by 2030, released by the Academy in October. This follows a 2 megawatt experimental version that they did in 2021. It says here, prior to China's pilot project, the last operating molten salt reactor was Oak Ridge National Laboratory's molten salt reactor experiment, which ran on uranium, not thorium, but it shut down in 1969. So it does say there's not a lot of details of it, but according to the Chinese Academy of Sciences Environmental Impact Report, it'll be 3 meters in height, 2.8 meters in diameter, so not huge. It'll operate at 700 degrees Celsius and have a thermal output of 60 megawatts, along with 10 megawatts of electricity. And this is pretty interesting. It says the element is a waste product of China's rare earth mining industry, which is huge, and harnessing it would provide a practically inexhaustible supply of fuel. Again, same reason. So it's not just that they're creating a thorium breeder reactor, it's that they're doing a molten salt reactor that's run on thorium, which has apparently never really been done at this scale before. There are some other projects in the works that are worth talking about. There's a company called Natura Resources working with Abilene Christian University right here in Texas. They're collaborating on a 1 megawatt liquid molten salt reactor after receiving permission. Kairos Power is working on a fluoride salt-cooled high-temperature reactor in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It said it'll use uranium-based tristructural isotropic particle fuel. Say that 10 times fast. And this is interesting. I'll talk about this in a second. They actually inked a deal with Google to provide a total of 500 megawatts by 2035 to power its data centers. But it goes on here to talk about all the different other places they're talking about, like Denmark, India, Japan, United Kingdom. There's a lot of people working on this, so it's a big deal that this project is moving forward. It'll provide some really interesting data and information so that we can, kind of perfect this technology and maybe it could be an actual thing in the future. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier about the Google deal with Kairos Energy, it's an interesting time right now. Nuclear energy is kind of having a moment because tech companies are now needing more power for all the AI models that they're running these days. We thought that crypto and Bitcoin was consuming a lot of energy. Well, the LLMs are doing even more. So anyway, if you're considering a career change or you want to get in on a new boom, you might want to bone up on your science skills, which you can do with today's sponsor, Brilliant. You can start things off with their scientific thinking course, which helps explain the scientific concepts behind everyday living and helps you to kind of think like an engineer. It really gives you a new lens to view the world around you and establishes a foundation that you can build on to learn everything from machines to black holes. And that's one of the things that makes Brilliant so great. They just kind of take you through one step at a time using interactive puzzles and games that engage your natural problem-solving skills. This way you learn it in a way that makes the most sense to you so that when you build on that, it comes a lot more naturally, and before long you're mastering concepts that you never thought possible. And speaking of AI, they've got brand new courses in how AI works, where you can get a better understanding of LLMs, which are pretty much taking over the world right now, so that seems pretty important. You can do it on your desktop or take it with you on the mobile app. You can even download courses to take with you when you're away from a signal. Like I always say, you find yourself doom scrolling or playing a game in your downtime, you could be spending that time learning valuable math and science skills. Like especially if you always struggle with a certain subject, like math. I always struggled with math when I was in school. But Brilliant teaches you by solving problems, so it's kind of more personalized. You learn it in your own way, so it sticks a lot better than traditional schools, and for a lot of people anyway. But don't take my word for it. You can try it yourself for free when you visit brilliant.org/answerswithjoe or scan the QR code right there on the screen. And that'll also give you 20% off their annual premium subscription. So yeah, go check out their courses. They've got dozens of them. You can find a subject you've always struggled with and just give it a try. Give yourself a month or whatever. It's free. And you'll be shocked with how much difference it makes. So one more time, it's brilliant.org/answerswithjoe or just click the link down in the description. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching, and if you'll indulge me for just a second, since you've watched this far, I thought I might do a little bit of housekeeping. I know we haven't been posting on a very regular schedule lately, and I wanted to just address that for just a second. There's been a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. There's something that we're going to be announcing in next week's video that's really huge. We've been working on it for a long time. Can't wait to do it. Also, I kind of completely redid my recording setup here. I mean, it looks the same behind me, but I'm working with a new computer, new lights. I basically replaced everything except for the camera, and we're still kind of dialing it in a little bit. So if things look a little bit different in this video and upcoming videos, that's why. But no, there's just been a lot of things going on behind the scenes that will eventually, you guys will see. There's a whole stack of scripts that I've got lined up. So the videos will be coming back on a regular schedule pretty soon, probably next month. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sticking around. Thanks for your patience. We will be back to our regularly scheduled program soon enough, I promise. But hey, if this is your first video, I do very different kinds of videos normally, but Google might think you'll like this one. You can click that or look down the sidebar if you're on a browser. Just give them a look. If you enjoy them, I invite you to subscribe because I do normally put out videos every week. We'll get back to that soon though. But thanks to my Patreon supporters for these questions and everybody that supports the channel. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week. Stay safe, and I'll see you next Monday. Actually, I will see you next Monday. Yeah. Okay. Love you guys. Take care.